Hello and welcome to Cheers to Fears, where we combine alcohol and horror movies for your entertainment.
Hello. Do you want to play a game?
Be food and drink and ghosts, and perhaps even a few murders. You're all invited.
Today we are making a drinking game for Saw X, and we also already made a couple of drinks for the Saw franchise that you can check out right up here.
The director for the movie is Kevin Greutert, who is no stranger to the Saw series, as he is the director for Saw 6 and Saw 3D. The writers are not new to the series either, as Josh Stolberg and Pete Goldfinger were the writers for Jigsaw and Spiral.
Saw X takes place in between the first and second installments of the series. In the movie, John Kramer runs into a person from his old support group that happens to be cancer-free from an unorthodox treatment down in Mexico. Desperate for a cure, he travels down there to get an operation to cure him. However, the company turns out to be scam artists. These people have already scammed several people out of their money, but they never anticipated that one of the people they could be scamming is the infamous Jigsaw serial killer. Now the scam artists must play in a Jigsaw game and try to survive the night.
Just a bit of a forewarning, there is going to be mild spoilers for Saw X, but nothing that's really going to take you out of the movie. Furthermore, there's not going to be totals for the movie, as this is a new movie made in 2023, so we want to keep it as spoiler-free as possible. So let's move on to the rules.
So yeah, of course, the first rule is death. And in this movie, there's a few brutal ones.
Yeah, one off the top of my head is the big one that's in the poster, which, I wish we got to see a little bit more of it, or it actually being played out. However, let's move on to the next rule, which is whenever somebody screams, cries, and yells, you take a drink. There were a lot of tears shed in this movie, and I think it's definitely one of Tobin Bell's best performances in the series.
Yeah, and I think it's because he's more front and center in this movie, like he's actually the main character, rather than just hidden in the shadows. But anyways, we'll move right along to the next rule, which is whenever there's a new trap introduced. And I think some of the traps were all right, and some of them were could have been really brutal. And actually, one of them that I'm thinking of was pretty brutal. But I think a lot of them were kind of lackluster, and I don't know if there was just not enough traps like some of the other ones, or they just didn't live up to my expectations of some of the Jigsaw traps that we know and love. But something was missing for the traps, I think.
Yeah, it could have been the whole scenario that it was played out in, but I think they were very hit and miss, but in my opinion, they were a little bit more missed than some of the earlier installments in the franchise. Now let's move on to the next rule, which is whenever a tape is played, you take a sip. And this is honestly still a classic rule to include in the Saw franchise.
Yeah, we included it in every other drinking game we've made for Saw, so we felt it was important enough to bring it back. But we'll move right along to another rule that we love to use in the Saw franchise. It's whenever there's a flashback. And the flashbacks in this movie are pretty much just flashing back to scenes we've seen in the movie previously.
Yeah, it's not really the full soap opera that we gotten from previous Saw movies.
Yeah.
I'll say that much.
Yeah, exactly.
Rule number 6 is whenever cancer is mentioned. This is a completely new rule that we haven't mentioned in any other Saw movie, but it is mentioned quite a few times in the movie, so we thought we'd bring it here.
Yeah, and it's kind of the main storyline for this installment. Like we said, John Kramer has a more front and center role this time around, and so we get to see him, I guess, seek help for his cancer a little bit more. So it's brought up a lot, like you said. So now we'll move on to rule number 7, which is a rule we've used occasionally, but not for every drinking game. It is whenever we see a pig mask, and it'll probably give you a decent amount of sips, but nothing too crazy.
Yeah, I think the mask itself is kind of synonymous with the Saw series, especially since it's a little bit more prevalent in this installment. Definitely not other ones, but this is one of the ones that we can certainly bring this rule for.
Yeah, for sure.
Now let's move on to rule number 8, which honestly I think is one of the hardest rules that we've done for the Saw series. That rule is whenever John is said, and I think because he's so front and center, it certainly makes for, I think honestly, the hardest rule in any Saw drinking game that we've made.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, it's obviously going to be said a lot, especially in this movie when, like we said multiple times, John has the main role, and yeah, he's just always in the room with other patient or subjects or like victims of his, and you just always see him, and they're always talking about John or talking to John, and they always say his name. So yeah, we brought it back, and we needed a hard rule for this. So
Yeah, I think one example of that is I think it's a lot more empathetic to say somebody's name and try to make you sympathize with them if you do say their name.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why they wrote it into the script and they're saying his name so much, is because it's a form of empathy and just trying to get out of the situation, give them tons of money.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. But anyways, we'll move right along to rule number 9. It's whenever Spanish is spoken. And this movie takes place in Mexico for the most part, so it makes sense that this rule will pop up a few times.
Oh yeah, certainly. One thing that I can think of for a drinking game is if you have a tequila-based drink, this might be the drinking game to use it for.
True.
Just because it's the only Saw game in Mexico.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's move on to the last rule, which is whenever John's morals are mentioned. It's the fact that he doesn't murder people and he sees it like that. And honestly, the other people should see it like they murder people.
Yeah. And like it also includes when, he puts people in the traps that deserve it for their wrongdoings and stuff like we know. And, he talks about that or whatever. He talks about how he doesn't kill people, like you said. Anything along those lines is what this rule kind of is there for. And it happens a decent amount of times in this movie, I noticed. But again, nothing too crazy. Nothing like rule number 8, that's for sure. And just a reminder that since this is a new movie released just this year, we don't do total number of sips just to avoid spoilers as much as possible. But that won't stop us from speculating how many drinks that it might have given us.
So I'm thinking about 4.5 drinks. But a good chunk of that definitely comes from the rule John alone. I think that's going to be a brutal rule in any version of the drinking game that you play, especially compared to other Saw games. I think this is going to be hard just for that fact.
Yeah, I think that rule alone will give you a lot of drinks. But I think this Saw drinking game kind of is on par with the other Saw drinking games that we've had, which I guess playlist is up here if you want to go check out those other drinking games we made for this entire Saw franchise. We'll put that up there. But yeah, I do think this is kind of on par for how many drinks you're going to have for it, I think. But that rule, you're right, is definitely the hard hitter in this one.
Yep. And again, if there's another Saw drinking game, we'll definitely make sure to make another video for that.
Absolutely.
So keep your eyes peeled out in another 2 years where they decide to still throw Tobin Bell in the movie once again, even though he's been dead since like 2006 in the Saw franchise. And with all that being said, we hope you enjoyed our drinking game on Saw X. If you ended up playing the game alongside the movie, or if you have any other feedback or suggestions, make sure to leave a comment below.
Make sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on our next videos, which are likely going to be the drinks that we came up for Saw X. So just keep your eyes out for that. But in the meantime, thanks for tuning in, and this is us saying,
Cheers to fears.